episode 31. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight hails from Australia, where he had an encounter when he was 15 or 16 years old. Kieran Pittman, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
You're welcome.
For starters, Kieran, if you don't mind, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I live in Australia in a little town called Gloucester. I'm 25 years old, and that's about all there is to me. I'm a bit of a gamer. I read books. I have a girlfriend and her two lovely kids. They're my stepchildren, and we sort of get by in life.
I want to ask you, as far as the dogman topic goes, Kieran, how's it looked at in Australia?
Well, as far as I know, it doesn't appear to be on the radar at all. It really doesn't seem to show up. I haven't heard of anyone else seeing anything like it or talking about them. I've never run into someone who had a similar experience or anything like that. To me, I guess it's not really known, if that makes sense.
When did you first hear about dogmen?
Do you mean Dogman or my experience?
When was the first time that you knew that there was supposed to be something out there, whether in Australia or any other place in the world, that people called dogmen?
The first time I ran into it was when my girlfriend showed me this show on YouTube. Before then, I thought I was the only person in the world to have run into one. So I really didn't know what to call them or what to make of them. I tried Google searching a few different things and nothing ever came up with it, but I tried to get as much information as I could on the old school werewolf tales, because that to me was the closest thing I could relate to the creature I saw. She showed me your radio show, and I suddenly knew that I wasn't the only person on the planet to have seen one, and I wanted to share my tales. So.
Well, that's interesting. You know, you're not the only person who's seen one of these things that thought that they were the only one in the world that had been through such an encounter. That's one of the reasons why I created the website, dogmanencounters.com, and I created the show, was to try and get the word out, especially to people like that thought that, unfortunately, it was only them that had been through such a situation. If you don't mind, please set up for us the chain of events that led to you having your encounter with that dog man.
Well, it was about 10 years ago. I can't remember the exact date. It was a really hot summer here in Australia, and I was living in a house in Watanabe with my family. And the day had got to about 50 degrees Celsius, so it was just a really stinking hot day. It was about 11:30, 12 o'clock, sometime around then at night, and I'd been laying in bed for a few hours trying to get some sleep, and it was still really hot in the house. So I got up and went to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, and I went back down the little hallway, and straight opposite my room at the time was the laundry and then the back door onto a little step. So I just walked out there and stood out in the cool air to cool down, and I was having a drink of water and looking out at there's a big empty paddock next to the house, and all behind us is all bush and scrubland, and I love just standing out there and, you know, looking at the empty paddocks and the empty fields and forests and woodlands and that. So I was standing out there having a cool drink, relaxing and trying to get cool down to go back inside to have a sleep, when I either heard something or I felt something, or I wanted to, for whatever reason, look to my left, which was down the backyard. So I turned and looked down the yard, and that's when I saw the creature.
How old were you when you had that encounter?
I think I was between birthdays. I was either 15 or 16. I can't remember. I'm leaning more towards 16, but I can't really remember exactly how old I was.
It's not like there's an age where it is a good thing to have an encounter, but that's especially still too young to have one. You're just not prepared for something like that. Again, not that you ever are prepared for an encounter with something like a dog man at any age, but being 15 or 16, that's especially hard. If you don't mind, continue on from there. When you turned, looked, and saw the dog man, what happened then?
Well, I turned and I looked, and about 15 to 20 metres away, which in feet I think is about 50 to 60 feet, somewhere in that range, was the back fence. And just outside of the back fence, squatting down, was a very black, dark shadow shape. And I focused on it. It took a second or so for my brain to register that that's not just a shadow, it was something. And looking at it, to me, it looked like a dark, shaggy human with very long hair, very well built, not super muscular, but very strong muscle definition would be the right word. Looking at the creature, it was looking down the yard, down the hill, towards the side fence that I had just been looking out over, and I was looking straight at it. It had its left hand resting up on the top of the fence, and its right hand was between its knees as it knelt there to brace itself, I guess. And that's when the creature turned its head and looked straight at me. It had a dog's muzzle, or a wolf's muzzle. It had pointed ears, very thick, dark fur all over the back of its head and its neck and its shoulders. In places thicker and thinner, but it was completely covered in hair. And it had these eyes that I'll never forget, these piercing blue human-like eyes that just stared straight through me. We locked eyes. I stared at it for, I said forever. It felt like minutes passed, but really it must have only been two to 3 seconds. And in that 2 or 3 seconds, it felt to me like the creature assessed me, whether I was predator, a threat, food, what I was, and for whatever reason it decided I wasn't worth its time. I just got that feeling that it wasn't worth going after me, and that's when I basically ran away. I freaked out pretty hardcore. I don't really remember much of what happened next. I must have gone inside, closed the door and locked it behind me, and I ran inside. I grabbed a letter opener, a silver letter opener, and climbed into my wardrobe, closed the door behind me, and that's where my parents found me in the morning. I was still sitting in the bottom of the wardrobe, clutching this thing. I'd fallen asleep at some point in the night. I don't know how. I honestly, I went into a bit of a state of shock, I think. I really don't remember what happened. And, yeah, that was basically my whole encounter. It must have only been a 5 to 10 second look at the creature, but I'll never forget it. It's burned into my mind.
Oh, I can understand that. I'm so glad you didn't let the wind out of your parents with that silver letter opener when they opened up that door in the morning.
Oh, they called my name, and I banged. I must have moved, half waking up, and they opened the door, and there I was, still sitting in the wardrobe with the letter opener in my hands. I don't know why I grabbed a silver letter opener over a knife. Part of me thinks instinctually I just associated it straight away with a werewolf, which, as I said before, is the only creature that comes close to what I saw. At the time, I didn't know about dogmen or anything like that, so I just, werewolf from movie, werewolf in backyard, and I just went with that, you know, and that's basically my entire encounter.
Of all the werewolf movies that you've seen, Kieran, which movie represents the dog man that you saw the closest?
I've wondered that, because after I saw it, I really began to want to know more about werewolves. So I looked into every werewolf movie, I read werewolf books, I looked up the first werewolf encounter in Germany, in the Black Forest. I went a little werewolf crazy, to be honest. The closest I would have to say is a toss-up between the British movie Dog Soldiers or the Underworld movies. Not the one where they look more like cats, but the one where they've given them the proper muzzle. It's sort of a mix between the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. The Underworld movies are mentioned quite often when it comes to eyewitnesses describing how the dogman that they saw looked. So I'm not surprised at all to hear you reference that movie when you're trying to describe the one that you saw. Now, having said all of that, did you get a chance to take a look at its legs? I know you said that you saw it had its right hand down between its legs as it was kind of crouched there. You're saying that its right arm was kind of used to support its weight?
Maybe it was just a comfortable position, but it was touching the ground with its right hand between its knees. To be honest, it looked like an elongated dog's hind leg. It had the dog's ankle with that reverse sort of angle from the feet to the ankle. That joint looked like a dog's, especially how it was tucked up underneath its backside, and its knee bent like ours did.
So it did have hocks, just like a dog or a horse would.
Yes, that's the correct word, hocks. Sorry, I was struggling for a word there.
If it had hocks like that, dogs and horses, instead of having what's called a knee, they've got what's called a stifle joint. It's a flatter type of knee horizontally than what a hominid-style knee would look like. Is that what this had, or was its knee more human-like in appearance, rounder?
The way it was kneeling, it had to have been more human-like, I'd say. It looked exactly like, I don't know if you've seen a ninja movie when they crouch down and they've got their feet underneath their backsides. That's exactly the knee shape it had. It was bent and the knee nearly doubled over on itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Now, when you're describing the fur on this dog, man, I wasn't totally clear on what you were describing there. Were you saying that it almost had a form of a mane up around its head, neck, and shoulders?
Yeah, the fur, the only thing I could sort of compare it to would be, do you know some dog breeds and wolves, like a husky, how they have a lot of thick fur right behind its shoulders and around the back of their neck? That's what it looked like. The hair or fur was a lot thicker there, and then on the rest of its body, although it was there, it got slightly thinner all the way down to the hands and the bottom half of the leg, the ankle from the hock down sort of thing. I didn't really see what fur was on it. I just remember the shoulders and the back of the head and even halfway down its back sort of thing was very thick fur.
Did you ever get an idea what it was focused on before it turned its head and looked at you?
As far as I could tell, I mean, I'd just been looking in the same direction it had, and the paddock which led to it was probably a 200 metre or 200 yard empty space of grassland, followed by a bit of a brushy wooded area, and as far as I could tell, there was absolutely nothing in there. I didn't see anything before I looked at it. It seemed to be quite intent on that area. I don't know if I gasped or something, but it sort of snapped its head towards me, and that's when I freaked out.
Well, if you did gasp, I don't think anyone could blame you. That's for sure. What kind of size estimate would you give on this thing?
Well, the fence would have been between 5 and 6 feet tall, and kneeling down it was coming up about halfway. So standing fully erect, I would have to estimate at least 6 to 7 feet, maybe 8. It would be within that size range. Its arms looked quite comfortable reaching from halfway down the fence to the top of the fence. Its elbow was slightly bent, so it had to have been quite tall.
Yeah, I'd say it sure sounds like it. Since you're in the beginning stages of familiarizing yourself with my show, you might not know that the type of dogman that you saw is what I refer to as being a canine type.
very clearly had a very canine muzzle with the sharp teeth showing on the sides, and they were white in the half moon. There was a half moon out, so I really clearly saw the creature. Like I said, the first thing that I thought of in the morning was a werewolf. That was it's the closest I knew at the time to it.
Oh, I don't think anyone could blame you for coming to that conclusion. Not having anything else to compare it to, that's the only conclusion that you could be expected to make. That next morning, Kieran, when your parents found you in the wardrobe, how did they react? Did you share the details of that encounter? Tell them what had happened the night before right there in the spot? If so, what kind of reaction did you get?
In the morning, when my parents ushered me out of the wardrobe, it took me a little while to get my thoughts together enough to explain it. Like, I'm talking 1 or 2 minutes. Dad just kept saying, "What were you doing in there? Why weren't you in your bed? What happened? What happened, son? What happened?" And Mum was nervous. She was sort of hovering around behind Dad. And I just said, "Look, this is what I saw," and I told them exactly what I've told you. I went out the back. I saw this dark, and I said to them at the time, this dark, dog-like werewolf creature, this thing in the backyard, Mum and Dad. I saw this. And Mum, she's a very open sort of person. She said, "Oh, well, you saw something. Do you think it was a..." And she started sort of trying to put it as it was not there to hurt me, some sort of weird animal totem or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. My mum is a bit of a hippie, to be honest. And Dad, he did the age-old, I guess the typical father thing. He just wanted to calm me down. I was shaking and wandering around the house. I was looking out windows. I was getting anxious, raising my voice even to try and, "Dad, there's something out there." And he said, "Look, son, you probably saw a large black dog